coffee all over my face. Oh, sorry. We're gonna start kind of in the middle of this commission hearing. I'd like to hear it, so we're gonna do that while we play Dead by Daylight.
We will shoot back. Or we'll get our guns. We outnumber you. They said, join us. I heard specific threats to the lives of Speaker Nancy Pelosi and then also Vice President Mike Pence. But the physical violence we experienced was horrific and devastating. My fellow officers and I were punched, kicked, shoved, sprayed with chemical irritants, and even blinded with eye-damaging lasers by a violent mob, who apparently saw us, law enforcement officer, dedicated to ironically protecting them as U.S. citizens.
I know a lot of these people are only making fun
of their attempted insurrection. The mob brought weapons to try to accomplish their insurrectionist objectives and use them against us. These weapons included hammers, rebars, knives, baton, and police shields taken by force, as well as bear spray and pepper spray. Some of the riders wore tactical gear, including bulletproof vests and gas masks. The rider also forcibly took our batons and shields to use them against us. I was particularly shocked at seeing the insurrectionists violently attack us with the very American flag that they claim to sought to protect.
Remember when they put up a Trump
coordinated
flag?
Tactics we observed and verbal commands we heard, it appears that many of these attackers had law enforcement or military experience. The riders were vicious and relentless. We found ourselves in a violent battle, desperate to attempt to prevent the breach of the Capitol by the entrance near the inauguration stage. Metropolitan police officers were being pulled into the crowd. We have one right here, right next to me. As we tried to push the riders back from the breach in the Capitol, in my attempt to assist two MPD officers, I grabbed one by the officer by the back of the collar and pulled him back to the police line.
I should probably have my game playing.
When I tried to help the second officer, I found on top of some police shields on the ground that were slippery because of pepper spray and bear spray. Riders immediately began to pull me by my leg, by my shield, by my gear strap on my left shoulder.
That's not the right screen.
My survivor's instincts kicked in, and I started kicking and punching as I tried in vain to get MPD officer attention behind and above me. They could not help me because they also were being attacked. I finally was able to hit the rider who was grabbing me with my baton and able to stand. And then I continued to fend off new attackers as they kept rotating and attacking us again and again.
I don't know what an appropriate
place
for this is.
What we were suggested that day was like something from a medieval battle. We fought hand to hand, inch by inch, to prevent an invasion of the Capitol by a violent mob intent on subverting our democratic process. My fellow officers and I were committed to not letting any riders reach the Capitol. It was a prolonged and desperate struggle. The riders attempted to reach the Capitol were shouting, "Trump, send us."
Filter.
Pick the right side. We want Trump.
No.
I vividly heard officers screaming in agony and pain, just an arm length from me. I didn't know at that time, but that was Officer Hodges. And he's here today to testify.
Yeah, I don't see it. Oh, yeah.
I too was being crushed by the riders. I could feel myself losing oxygen and recall thinking to myself, this is how I'm going to die, defending this entrance. Many of the officers fighting alongside me were calling for shields because their shields had been stripped from them by the riders. I was one of the few officers left with a shield, so I spent the majority of my time at the front of the line. I later find out that my wife and relatives were...
You know, sometimes I really have to wonder how all of this would have gone down if the DC police had been appropriately equipped for the occasion and nobody had been allowed to get in, you know? I really wonder what kind of alt timeline that would have spawned. If I remember correctly, I think the reason why there were so few people is because the DC police commissioner didn't want to bring in the National Guard, or like, I don't know if it was, there was something, it wasn't like some crazy conspiracy, there was some kind of bureaucratic mess up behind the scenes that kept more soldiers from being there, because if the National Guard were there, they never would have been able to get into the building, you know? the difference between DC Police and National Guard being there. Trump would have had control of the National Guard. There was another thing then, like more DC Police. It had something to do with the commissioner.
Right. Probably should have got some water.
No, so it could have been Trump had control of the National Guard. There was some other thing, though. There was something... There were a collection of problems that led to a lack of appropriate security. Pentagon hesitated in sending in guard to Capitol riot. Is this because they didn't want Trump to have control?
Let's see if I can actually hear with this going on at the same time. I should be able to, though.
Trump would not have had control of the guard if they'd been deployed. I keep hearing mixed points on that.
I'm going to put my glasses back on.
Yeah, there were fewer Capitol Police than normal. Didn't DC want to avoid an optics battle of sending in people? Maybe, but it's also pretty bad optics to let them storm the building when there were Congress people in there, you know? That might be bad optics and bad actual engagement, you know? Let me see. Would Trump have actually... Who said they did not think that it looked good to have a military presence. Yeah, I wonder about that. I just wonder what would have happened if these troops had been sent. It doesn't... It's not saying that they would have withheld because Trump would have had control of them.
I don't understand, but okay.
Here we go. This is what I was talking about. The Capitol Police had also indicated days earlier they would not seek National Guard help, and in letters to Walker, District of Columbia Mayor Muriel Bowser laid out the city's request for help and made it clear there would be
thank you so much for the like.
on the Guard members. Yeah, the Capitol Police actually denied. I don't know if it's because they didn't know the extent of the threat. Whatever the circumstances behind things, I just wonder how things would have been different if there had been appropriate
Yeah, take the hit.
protection at the building, you know? I know Trump supporters, the troops definitely would have killed more people that had died in our timeline. With the greatest of respect to the fine patriots of January 6th, if there was a literal line of National Guardsmen blocking that staircase, and they had still tried to push forward, I can only feel so bad for them. I mean, they literally would have had a wall of soldiers. Like, what do they need to stay away? A tank? Like, what? I don't know, you know? This isn't like a regular protest pushing back against, like, police officers. They're trying to get into a building to kill Congress people, you know? This isn't a situation where there's, like, an appropriate amount of give and take that you can do with, like, riots, you know? Let's not justify violence. Look, I'm just saying that if the National Guard were there, and the Trump supporters had continued to, like, what, storm them? I mean, what would the soldiers have done? Just back up? If then what's the point of deploying them? Are they just like the world's most expensive fence? You know? Yeah. There's zombies.
Just trying to learn about this because
yeah, maybe
it's important where I live, so.
Can you imagine if there was a tank? Twitter would have been full of Tiananmen Square photo op comparisons. Oh my god, they would have been. 100%. They would have been getting in there trying to kill Mike Pence, and it would have been like, this is like China. This is like when they killed those protesters, except we're storming the building with weapons. Yeah. Yeah, they would have played victim.
Right,
I mean, if nothing else, they could have, like, tear gassed the crowd, right? Listen, if the police can tear gas peaceful protesters in Seattle and Portland, I think the National Guard should be able to tear gas violent insurrectionist fascists in DC. Does that seems fair to me? Does anyone else think that's fair? You know? Pretty sure they did tear gas the January 6th riots toward the end. Yeah, towards the end, but I mean, like, if the National Guard had been there, they could have just blanketed everything How about nobody tear gases anybody? Hot take, no war crimes, though. Wait, seriously? You have issue with that? Tear gassing the January 6th
good evening.
Insurrectionists
Good morning on
to
my end.
discourage them from trying to storm the... How do you propose you stop them?
We're probably gonna get this one, which is fine.
You're falling for it? Is it all bait? The tear gas is a war crime discourse is dumb. Yeah. This is bait. This is bait. You're not holding me down. I think technically tear gas is not allowed in wartime. But does that mean it's not allowed for civilian use? Wait, honest question for chat. What how do you propose you stop things like January 6th? Like, I would rather they use tear gas than rubber bullets, right? Like, rubber bullets are potentially way more destructive than tear gas, right? Live ammunition. It's not allowed in war, but just because it's a chemical weapon in general, not because it is itself extreme. Yeah, I think tear gas is banned in war because chemical weapons are blanket banned in war. But when you use chemical weapons in war, it's not tear gas. Like, in World War I, they didn't have planes dropping canisters of tear gas into trenches. It was like mustard gas, or yeah, like white phosphorus or something. Very, very different, right? I mean, the French did tear gas? Yeah. Interesting.
I haven't really hooked anyone yet.
I feel like, and this is a guess.
That's okay.
The reason we banned chemical weapons was probably because of the mustard gas and not because of the tear gas. Like, if the only chemical weapon humans had access to was tear gas, I think they would go, oh yeah,
that's all right.
That
Good job
probably is better than carpet bombing. A little bit. Have you ever been tear gassed? It's fucking awful and I was sick for days. I have not been. However, I would prefer to be tear gassed than shot by a group of soldiers.
Yeah, get out of here.
Now, I also haven't been shot by a group of soldiers, so I could be totally off base on this. Tear gas is deadly inside a building. Okay. Real question, then.
Goodbye.
I'm not trying to argue with you guys.
How's your practice on
Are you legitimately suggesting that
that was definitely not the best of rounds, but they were pretty good, so
I'll
give it to them.
Crowds
I'm also distracted because I'm watching this.
Should only be rubber bullets? Which can kill? Like, pretty easily?
Excuses.
What do you want? Like, water cannons? Like, during the civil rights protest? What about those heat rays? Don't use either, just make them go away. Is this are you joking? That was a joke, right? Don't use anything, just make them go away. Do you want the soldiers to like go in there and like just shove them? Like, dude, fuck off, dude. This is the Capitol, bro. Dude, shove off, dude. Fuck off, dude. Come on, dude. Like, how do you want?
That's what I should have went for. That's all right. Yeah, can you play with watching? I have no idea.
I mean, there are people in chat
my
who
ADHD doesn't really
don't have
lend
an answer
well
to,
to
this,
that.
Just shoot them in the leg.
It's
just
all right.
Sweep the. That was a joke. Don't get mad at that one. Just sweep the legs. Oh. What? Water cannons? Can't
but
water
something I'd like
cannons,
to remain relatively
strip the flesh from your bone?
Educated on. And I'd like the stream today as well, so I figured I'd mix the two.
Dude, unironically, if you want a less lethal weapon, if you want a less lethal weapon that that I don't think has ever killed a person, you got to use the military's active denial system, okay?
So
the
I should
heat
have
ray. Give me that CNN
level
clip.
3 now.
Yeah.
Sweet. And
This is the future of terrifying people.
Ray. It's invisible. It's silent. It's real.
Is he done?
But
with
it's
the
not
commission?
deadly.
No, he's not. Okay.
Don't. Isn't it nice?
Like the heat ray.
Let's take a look at the risks.
Skip ahead a little bit.
Just keep in mind that less than lethal policing methods are a thing that need to exist, so it's important that we find ones that are actually less than lethal. So what are the risks? Due to potential risks and a lack of studies on the health impact of sonic weapons, the ACLU recommends their use on protesters be suspended. Well, what potential risks? Acoustic weapon fact sheet from the ACLU. This probably just fucking deafens you, doesn't it? Like you just...
You'd be surprised. Low frequency stuff can take a toll on your body in general.
Acoustic weapons, very loud, painful, significant harm to the ears, contributing hearing loss, loud, painful, and dangerous levels of noise. It feels like, for like crowd control, there's nothing you could do that wouldn't be lethal to somebody. Things that are electric in nature can potentially kill people with like pacemakers, like stuff like that. Anything concussive has the potential to kill depending on where it hits you. Anything sound-based, depending on proximity, can potentially kill you. Heat rays could cause cancer, like long-term, which is unacceptable. Smell might be the only way. Is it just smell? Is that the only thing?
I like what I
Maybe
have
smell
so
is it. Maybe stink bombs are really the way to go. You also have to keep in mind that these are not going to be used, like, optimally by the people who use them. The Department of Defense might make these really cool weapons, but then they give them to some dumb fuck police operative who's going to roll on up and use them 3 feet away from the eardrums of some 5-year-old, okay? Just keep in mind, like, that you have to build these things so that even if used improperly, they're not lethal. Heat rays can't cause cancer? I don't know. It's probably something. I don't know.
Alright, I'm gonna skip a little further.
Well, fun mechanic or two, but like legit, I do not know what the
doing my job and help secure, because they were watching the turmoil on television.
Yeah,
It was now
tone shift.
4:26 p.m.
Snap
after
back
giving
to
CPR to one of
reality.
the riders who breached the Capitol in an effort to save her life, that I finally had a chance to let my own family know that I was alive. After order has been restored at the Capitol, in many hours, I arrived home at nearly 4 a.m. on January 7th. I had to push my wife away from me because she wanted to hug me. And I told her no, because of the other chemical that my uniform had on. Sorry.
No worries, King. Nobody here is judging you.
I couldn't sleep because the chemical reactivated after I took a shower, and my skin was burning. I finally fell asleep 2 hours later, completely physically and mentally exhausted. Yet by 8 o'clock a.m., I was already back, on my way back to the Capitol. And I continued to work for 15 consecutive days until after the inauguration. I made sure to work despite my injuries because I wanted to continue doing my job and help secure the Capitol complex. More than 6 months later, I'm still trying to recover from my injuries. Many of my fellow Capitol officers, as well as MPD officers, suffer several physical injuries from the violence inflicted on us on January 6th. I sustained injuries on both my hands, my left shoulder, my left calf, and my right foot. I already had undergone bone fusion surgery on my right foot, and I was just told that I needed surgery on my left shoulder. I have been on medical and administrative leave for much of the past 6 months, and I expect to need further rehabilitation for possibly more than a year. There are some who express outrage when someone kneels while calling for social justice. Where are those same people expressing the outrage to condemn the violence attack on law enforcement, the Capitol, and our American democracy? I'm still waiting for them. As Americans in the world watching horror what was happening at the Capitol, we did not receive timely reinforcement and support we needed. In contrast, during the Black Lives Matter protests last year, U.S. Capitol Police had all the support we needed and more.
Yep.
Why the different response? Were it not for the brave members of the MPD and later on from other law enforcement agencies, I'm afraid to think what could have happened on January 6th. I want to publicly thank all the law enforcement agencies that responded to assist that day for their courage and their support. I especially want to thank those Capitol Police officers who responded on their own from home after working midnight shift. Despite being outnumbered, we did our job. Every member of the House of Representatives, senators, and staff member made it home. Sadly, as a result of that day, we lost officers, some really good officers. But we held the line in our democratic process, because the alternative would have been a disaster. We are not asking for medals, recognition. We simply want justice and accountability. For most people, January 6th happened for a few hours. But for those of us who were in the thick of it, it has not ended. That day continued to be a constant trauma for us literally every day, whether because of our physical or emotional injuries or both. While it has not received much attention, sadly, many of my colleagues have quietly resigned from the Capitol because of that day. I'm also regularly called by law enforcement officials and prosecutors to help identify from photographs and videos the rioters. And to be honest, physical therapy is painful and hard. I could have lost my life that day, not once, but many times. But as soon as I recover from my injuries, I will continue forward and proudly serve my country in the U.S. Capitol Police. As an immigrant to the United States, I'm especially proud to have defended the U.S. Constitution and our democracy on January 6th. I hope that everyone in the position of authority in our country has the courage and conviction to do their part by investigating what happened on that terrible day and why. This investigation is essential to our democracy, and I'm deeply grateful to you for undertaking it. I'm happy to assist as I can and answer any question you may have to the best of my ability. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your riveting testimony, Sergeant Donnell. I now recognize Officer Fanone to summarize his testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of this committee, for inviting me to provide my eyewitness testimony.
All right. I know that my input here wasn't welcome, but this man feels like he's devastatingly handsome, and I sincerely hope that in 20 or 25 years I can look this good. You know? He looks
Gosh,
he looks a little bit like that guy from the movie. Was it The Road? Am I thinking of the right thing? What's that? The movie with the grizzled, like, salt and pepper hair and beard? He's, like, protecting his daughter or something.
Okay.
Wait, are
that's
people cringing at me here because they disagree, or because... Oh, not right now. Oh, I see. Okay. The Last of Us? No, not a game. Whatever. Jesus. Play another game.
Testimony of the violent assault on our nation's capital on January 6, 2021. My name, for those of you who don't know, is Michael Fanone. While I've been a sworn officer with the Metropolitan Police Department in Washington, D.C. for almost 2 decades, my law enforcement career actually began here in this building as a United States Capitol Police officer shortly after 9/11. In part because of the 2001 attack on our country by terrorists, I felt called to serve.
I'm definitely struggling today.
As a Capitol Police officer, I was proud to protect this institution and dedicated members of Congress and their staff who work hard each day to uphold our American democracy. I remain proud of the work of the United States Capitol Police and MPD officers who literally commit their lives to protecting the safety of each of you and all of us in this room in our nation's capital. After leaving the United States Capitol Police, I became an MPD officer serving the residents of Washington, D.C. I have spent the majority of my nearly 20 years as a Metropolitan Police officer working in special mission units whose responsibilities include the investigation and arrest of narcotics traffickers and violent criminals. I've worked both as an undercover officer and a lead case officer in many of these investigations. In this line of work, it probably won't shock you to know that I've dealt with some dicey situations.
That's all I need.
I thought I had seen it all, many times over. Yet what I witnessed and experienced on January 6, 2021 was unlike anything I had ever seen. Anything I'd ever experienced or could have imagined in my country. On that day, I participated in the defense of the United States Capitol from an armed mob of thousands determined to get inside. Because I was among the vastly outnumbered group of law enforcement officers protecting the Capitol and the people inside it. I was grabbed, beaten, tased, all while being called a traitor to my country. I was at risk of being stripped of and killed with my own firearm, as I heard Chance of kill him with his own gun. I can still hear those words in my head today. Although I regularly deal with risky situations on the job, nowhere in my wildest imagination did I ever expect to be in that situation, or sitting here before you talking about it. That experience and its aftermath were something that not even my extensive law enforcement training prepared me for. I was just one of hundreds of local police who lined up to protect Congress, even though I had not been assigned to do that. Some had asked why we ran to help when we didn't have to. I did that because I simply could not ignore what was happening. Like many other officers, I could not ignore the numerous calls for help coming from the Capitol complex. I'm a plainclothes officer assigned to the 1st District's crime suppression team. But for the first time in nearly a decade, I put on my uniform. When my partner Jimmy Albright and I arrived at the Capitol around 3 that afternoon, it was like
I might not get it in time though.
It was unlike any scene I had ever witnessed. Jimmy parked our police vehicle near the intersection of South Capitol Street and D Street in Southeast, and we walked to the Capitol. From there, passing the Longworth House Office building. It was eerily quiet, and the sidewalks, usually filled with pedestrians, were empty. As we made our way to Independence Avenue, I could see dozens of empty police vehicles that filled the street, police barricades which had been abandoned, and hundreds of angry protesters, many of whom taunted us as we walked towards the Capitol building. Jimmy and I immediately began to search for an area where we could be of most assistance. We made our way through a door on the south side of the Capitol, walking then to the crypt, and finally down to the lower West Terrace tunnel.
I know that's not specific to the details of the story, but this guy gives off major last day of retirement vibes. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I've been around here for 20 years, wanted to see if I could help, like that kind of thing. Like, major vibes. I mean, he's alive, so that's good, just saying.
It was there that I observed a police commander struggling to breathe as he dealt with the effects of CS gas that lingered in the air. Then I watched him collect himself, straighten his cap and trench coat adorned with its silver eagles, and return to the line. That commander was Ramey Kyle of the Metropolitan Police Department, and those images are etched into my memory, never to be forgotten. In the midst of that intense and chaotic scene, Commander Kyle remained cool, calm, and collected as he gave commands to his officers. "Hold the line," he shouted over the roar. Of course, that day, the line was the seat of our American government. Despite the confusion and stress of the situation, observing Ray's leadership, protecting a place I cared so much about, was the most inspirational moment of my life. The bravery he and others showed that day are the best examples of duty,
I'm not doing bad
honor,
at all.
and service. Each of us who carries a badge should bring those core values to our work every day. The fighting in the lower West Terrace tunnel was nothing short of brutal. Here I observed approximately 30 police officers standing
I didn't know where you were.
maybe 4 or 5 abreast, using the weight of their bodies to hold back the onslaught of violent attackers. Many of these officers were injured, bleeding, and fatigued, but they continue to hold the line. As I don't have to tell the members in this room, the tunnel is a narrow and long hallway. It is not the sort of space anyone would want to be pulled into hand-to-hand combat with an angry mob. Although the narrowness of the hallway provided what was probably the only chance of holding back the crowd from entering their personal offices, the House, and Senate chambers. In an attempt to assist injured officers, Jimmy and I asked them if they needed a break. There were no volunteers. Selflessly, those officers only identified other colleagues who may be in need of assistance. The fighting dragged on. I eventually joined the tactical line at the tunnel's entrance. I can remember looking around and being shocked by the sheer number of people fighting us. As my police body-worn camera shows, thousands upon thousands of people seemingly determined to get past us by any means necessary. At some point during the fighting, I was dragged from the line of officers and into the crowd. I heard someone scream, "I got one!" As I was swarmed by a violent mob,
There we go.
they ripped off my badge. They grabbed and stripped me of my radio. They seized ammunition that was secured to my body. They began to beat me with their fists and with what felt like hard metal objects. At one point, I came face to face with an attacker who repeatedly lunged for me and attempted to remove my firearm. I heard chanting from some in the crowd, "Get his gun," and kill him with his own gun. I was aware enough to recognize I was at risk of being stripped of and killed with my own firearm. I was electrocuted again and again and again with a taser. I'm sure I was screaming, but I don't think I could even hear my own voice. My body camera captured the violence of the crowd directed toward me during those very frightening moments. It's an important part of the record for this committee's investigation and for the country's understanding of how I was assaulted and nearly killed as a mob attacked the Capitol that day. And I hope that everyone will be able to watch it. The portions of the video...
The insane thing is that a lot of the people who he's describing the assault are probably walking free right now. You know? Like, there have been, like, proportionally very few arrests following the assault on the Capitol.
Oh yeah.
It's just crazy to think that,
I got one.
that
I
there
feel
are people
good.
in jail right now for, like, having a dime bag of weed on them. Or sometimes even being around somebody who did. And, like, these people attacked the Capitol building, and they're sitting pretty in whatever shithole they live in, you know?
I've seen remain extremely painful for me to watch at times, but it is essential that everyone understands what really happened that tragic day. During those moments, I remember thinking there was a very good chance I would be torn apart or shot to death with my own weapon. I thought of my 4 dogs.
Also, the unbelievable discipline of the Capitol Police that none of them just opened fired and just took apart the crowd is pretty impressive, you know? Like, all of the dozens and hundreds of police officers put in that position and none of them freaked out and just started firing into the crowd. That is pretty crazy. One did, but yeah, true. Wasn't the one person who did, they were firing at that one person? Or was there a person who fired indiscriminately into the crowd? The one person who fired, was that not targeted? Yeah, I think that was target. What I mean, like none of them freaked out and just started, like, indiscriminately shooting into the crowd, you know? Which is pretty insane. The Capitol Police have probably had more training. That's true. The Capitol Police have probably been...
Hey, that's what I
Wait,
want.
guys, why are there 20 people saying that a person was shot? I said from the very beginning, indiscriminately firing into the crowd. Why are you... I said that from the beginning, firing into the crowd. Not like they shot at one person. I mean, like, they start, like, gunning down the crowd. That's what I mean. I said that, like, 5 times. But there was a relatively strong degree of discipline being demonstrated there.
Hey.
Daughters who might lose their dad. I remain grateful that no member of Congress had to go through the violent assault that I experienced that day. During the assault, I thought about using my firearm on my attackers, but I knew that if I did, I would be quickly overwhelmed. And that, in their minds, would provide them with a justification for killing me. So I instead decided to appeal to any humanity they might have. I said as loud as I could manage, "I've got kids." Thankfully, some in the crowd stepped in and assisted me. Those few individuals protected me from a crowd and inched me toward the Capitol until my fellow officers could rescue me. I was carried back inside. What happened afterwards is much less vivid. I had been beaten unconscious and remained so for more than 4 minutes.
Also, this kind of feel like... I was gonna say, Verde, this kind of feels like an endorsement of my, my take on the whole, surrender to the mob thing, doesn't it, you know? Holy shit. And this isn't just a regular mob that thinks that you may have killed a person that you did in self-defense. This is a literal group of insurrectionists trying to kill you. And even in this environment, trained police officers recognize that firing into a crowd of people only escalates and exacerbates the situation. I don't know, I just... How pasty.
I know that Jimmy helped to evacuate me from the building and drove me to MedStar Washington Hospital Center, despite suffering significant injuries himself. At the hospital, doctors told me that I had suffered a heart attack, and I was later diagnosed with a concussion, a traumatic brain injury, and post-traumatic stress disorder.
Also add-on.
As my physical injuries gradually subsided and the adrenaline that had stayed with me for weeks waned, I've been left with the psychological trauma and the emotional anxiety of having survived such a horrific event. And my children continue to deal with the trauma of nearly losing their dad that day. What makes the struggle harder and more painful is to know so many of my fellow citizens, including so many of the people I put my life at risk to defend, are downplaying or outright denying what happened. I feel like I went to hell and back to protect them and the people in this room. But too many are now telling me that hell doesn't exist, or that hell actually wasn't that bad. The indifference shown to my colleagues is disgraceful. My law enforcement career prepared me to cope with some of the aspects of this experience. Being an officer, you know your life is at risk whenever you walk out the door, even if you don't expect otherwise law-abiding citizens to take up arms against you. But nothing, truly nothing, has prepared me to address those elected members of our government who continue to deny the events of that day, and in doing so, betray their oath of office. Those very members whose lives, offices, staff members I was fighting so desperately to defend. I agreed to speak here today and have talked publicly about what happened, because I don't think our response to the insurrection should have anything to do with political parties. I know that what my partner Jimmy and I suited up for on January 6th.
The thing that's really frustrating is that I feel like people on the left and even Democrats really don't politicize this stuff that much, you know? An apolitical response to the January 6th Capitol riots is basically what the Democratic Party did. We need to arrest those responsible. We need to find out what happened. That's it. They haven't played it up anywhere near as hard as they could have. Republicans are the ones who politicize it, and in this case started it. Same with COVID. The CDC and Democratic Party's response to COVID was not partisan. Hey, we need to wear masks or we're gonna die or whatever. Come on, you know? Republicans turn it into this giant culture war thing, and now there are tens of millions of Americans who are vaccine doubters and mask not wearers because of political involvement from the Republican Party. And this guy's like, this isn't a political thing, but like, which party keeps making it a political thing?
Fixed. Didn't have anything to do with political parties.
That's not true,
or
of
about
course.
politics,
Trump sent
or
those
what
people
political
there.
party any of you public servants belong to. I've worked in this city for 2 decades, and I've never cared about those things, no matter who was in office. All I've ever cared about is protecting you and the public, so you can do your job in service to this country and for those whom you represent. I appreciate your time and attention. I look forward to the committee's investigation, and I'm hopeful, with your commitment, we as a country will confront the truth of what happened on January 6th and do what is necessary to make sure this institution of our democracy never falls into the hands of a violent and angry mob. We must also recognize the officers who responded that day, many unsolicited, and their countless acts of bravery and selflessness. It has been 202 days since 850 MPD officers responded to the Capitol and helped stop a violent...
Wait, sorry, I saw some dumb shit in chat. Bosh, the Democrats are corporatist virtue signals. You need to stop hoping they won't be. Who the fuck asked? Did anyone ask? What are you talking about? What does that have to do with anything we're talking about right now?
Insurrection from taking over this Capitol complex, which almost certainly saved countless members of Congress and their staff from injury and possibly death. The time to fully recognize these officers is now. Thank you again for the opportunity to provide my testimony here today.
BGG.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and I don't think there's any question you have our commitment that we will do just that as a committee. I now recognize Officer Hodges to summarize.
One quick thing, by the way. I think I might actually redo that emote. The main problem with it is that I'm wearing a black shirt, and BGG is a black background, so it doesn't look that great here. The arms get clipped. I might re-record that off stream to get like the same vibe, basically, but not in a black shirt, you know?
That's fine.
Maybe.
Summarize his testimony.
Good morning to the committee, members of the
What
press.
the
Yeah,
fuck?
flag background.
Members of the committee, I'd like to thank you for the invitation today
That's
to provide my
such
account
bullshit.
of my knowledge and experiences from January 6th, 2021.
Oh, this one talks fast.
As the chairman mentioned, I'm a member of Civil Disturbance Unit 42. I was working in that capacity on the day in question.
Hehe.
We started
I
that
don't
day
think they
at
healed.
7:30 a.m.
No.
and our assignment at the time was to maintain high visibility along Constitution Avenue, namely the blocks leading up to President's
Now
Park,
low down the
where then
speed.
President Donald Trump was holding his gathering. My particular station was in front of 1111 Constitution Avenue, where I stood on foot as the crowd poured down the street and into the park. There were a significant number of men dressed in tactical gear attending the gathering, wearing ballistic vests, helmets, goggles, military face masks, backpacks, and without identifiable visible law enforcement or military patches. They appeared to be prepared for much more than listening to politicians speak in a park. Two of my colleagues were approached by a group of 3 to 4 of such men. They were white
don't
men
know
in
what
good
that
shape,
was about.
load-bearing vests equipped with molly pouches. They were wearing BDUs or battle
Well,
dress uniform pants, tactical boots,
good on you
black
getting a hug.
sunglasses, and short haircuts. They had radios, and one was equipped with an earpiece. After a bit of small talk, one of them asked my colleague something to the effect of, "Is this all the manpower you have? Do you really think you're going to be able to stop these people?" Dumbfounded, my colleague simply
I
expressed
don't know
an
what that.
understanding
What are
response.
these people doing?
Continued on. As the day went on and speakers in the park said their piece, I monitored the crowd on the radio. Over the radio, I heard our gun recovery unit working constantly, monitoring those in the crowd suspected of carrying firearms, making arrests and seizures when possible. Multiple gun arrests were made from January 5th through the 7th against those attending and likely had attended or planned to attend Donald Trump's gathering. Unfortunately, due to the course of events that day, we will never know exactly how many were carrying firearms and other lethal weapons.
That's
I don't
fun.
know what time it was, but eventually the flow of the foot traffic reversed, with people leaving President's Park and traveling eastbound down Constitution Avenue towards the United States Capitol. At approximately 12:30 p.m., I noticed a commotion about half a block to my east. I saw a crowd starting to coalesce around 2 figures. I ran to where they were and found a confrontation at the intersection of 10th and Constitution Avenue Northwest. One counter-protester, a black man, was backpedaling away from a white man in a Trump-labeled face mask who was closely following him with an outstretched arm. Myself and my colleague first arrived and physically separated the two, but a crowd of Donald Trump's people had gathered. They attempted to bait the counter-protester into attacking, shouting insults such as, "Your mother's a whore," and accusing him of hiding behind the cops. Eventually, enough MPD members had gathered to move along the crowd, who continued eastbound toward the Capitol building, and the counter-protester departed northbound on 10th Street. Returning to my post, I continued to monitor the radio. I could hear Commander Glover leading defense efforts at the Capitol
There we
as
go.
the protesters began their transition from peaceful assembly into terrorism. I became agitated and wished we could move into support, as I could hear the increasing desperation in the commander's voice. Yet we still had to wait for our orders to change. And eventually they did. At approximately 1:30 p.m., the commander authorized rapid response platoons to deploy their hard gear and respond to the Capitol, including CDU-42. The last thing I remember hearing over the air before departing for the Capitol grounds was confirmation that our explosive ordnance disposal team had discovered a device. Given which unit was being associated with the device, I immediately realized MPD had discovered a bomb of some type near the Capitol. This thought was never far from my mind for the rest of the day. We ran back to our vans and got on our hard gear as quickly as we could. Navigating alternate routes to avoid the foot traffic, we drove as close as we could to the Capitol, disembarking at the northwest side of the Capitol grounds. We gave our gear a final check and marched towards the West Terrace. The crowd was thinner the further out from the Capitol you were. So as we marched, the resistance that we initially met was verbal. A man sarcastically yelled, "Here come the boys in blue, so brave." Another called on us to remember your oath. There was plenty of booing. A woman called us stormtroopers. Another woman, who was part of the mob of terrorists laying siege to the Capitol of the United States, shouted traitors. More found appeal in this label and shouted traitors at us as we passed. One man attempted.
Bombs, you never heard of this? No, there were bombs planted at the DNC and GOP offices there. Before. They didn't go off. It was never found to plant them. I assume those are the ones that he's referring to, unless there are other bombs I'm not aware of.
Attempted to turn it into a duosyllabic chant. We continued to march. We had been marching in 2 columns, but as we got closer to the West Terrace, the crowd became so dense that in order to progress, we marched single file, with our hands on the shoulders of the man in front of us in order to avoid separation. However, as we came close to the
And a bomb was found nearby left in a car, I think. Ah, yes. Okay, I remember that too.
terrace, our line was divided and we came under attack. A man attempted to rip the baton from my hands, and we wrestled for control. I retained my weapon after I pushed him back. He yelled at me, "You're on the wrong team." Cut off from our leadership, which was at the front of our formation, we huddled up
God
to assess
damn.
the threat surrounding us. One man tried and failed to build a rapport with me, shouting, "Are you my brother?" Another takes a different tack, shouting, "You will die on your knees." I was at the front of our group and determined we had to push our way through the crowd in order to join the defense proper. So I began shouting, "Make way!" as I forged ahead,
Okay,
hoping that
goodbye.
I'd clear a path for others behind me to follow. However, as I looked back, I saw that the rest of the group came under attack and were unable to follow. The crowd attempted to physically bar the rest of the platoon from following. I backtracked and started pulling the terrorists off my team from their backpacks and their collars. Around this time, one of the terrorists who had scaled the scaffolding that adorned the Capitol at the time threw something heavy down at me and struck me in the head, disorienting me. I suspect this resulted in the likely concussion I dealt with in the weeks after. Another man attempted to disarm me in my baton. And again, we wrestled for control.
Fuck me. Well, goodbye.
He kicked me in my chest as we went to the ground. I was able to retain my baton again, but I ended up on my hands and knees and blind. The
That
medical
pisses
mask
me
I was
off so
wearing at the
much.
time
Why does it
to
like
protect
not
myself
let
from
you
coronavirus was pulled up over my
teleport?
eyes so I couldn't see.
It's just
I
like, oh,
braced
yep.
myself
J-
against the
JK.
impact of their blows and feared the worst. Thankfully, my platoon had repelled their own attackers and got me back on my feet. The crowd started chanting USA at us, and we struck out again for the West Terrace. I led the charge through the midst of crowd control munitions, explosions, and smoke engulfing the area. Terrorists were breaking apart the metal fencing and bike racks into individual pieces, presumably to use as weapons. Thankfully, we made it to the secondary defense line on the West Terrace that MPD and Capitol Police were managing to hold. The rest of my platoon got behind the line, and we could take stock of the situation. I realized that back during the previous assault, someone had stolen my radio. From that point on, I was in the dark as to our current status, when reinforcements would arrive. Terrorists were scaling the scaffolding on both our sides, the tower that was in front of us, and attempting to breach
Hey,
the
have a
waist-high
good
metal
rest.
fencing.
Thanks for
That was
coming
the
by.
only barrier we had aside from ourselves. The sea of people was punctuated throughout by flags, mostly variations of American flags and Trump flags. There was Gadsden flags. It was clear the terrorists perceived themselves to be Christians. I saw the Christian flag directly to my front. Another read, "Jesus is my savior, Trump is my president." Another, "Jesus is king." One flag read, "Don't give up the ship." Another had crossed rifles beneath the skull, emblazoned with the pattern of the American flag. To my perpetual confusion, I saw the thin blue line flag, a symbol of support for law enforcement.
God damn, man. Yeah, I fucking bet you did.
Hey.
More than once, being carried by the terrorists as they ignored our commands and continued to assault us. The acrid sting of CS gas or tear gas and OC spray, which is mace, hung in the air as the terrorists threw our own CS gas canisters back at us and sprayed us with their own OC. Either they bought themselves or stole from us. Later, I learned at least one of them was spraying us in the face with wasp spray.
I gotta run to the restroom. I'll be right
The
back.
terrorists alternated between attempting to break our defenses and shouting at or attempting to convert us. Men alleging to be veterans told us how they had fought for this country and were
Oh, I'm back. How's everyone doing?
We're fighting for it again. One man tried to start a chant of 4 more years. Another shouted, "Do not attack us, we're not Black Lives Matter," as if political affiliation is how we determine when to use force. A man in a QAnon hoodie exclaims, "This is the time to choose which side of history to be on." A man whose shirt read "God, Guns, and Trump" stood behind him, silently holding a Trump flag. A new man came to the front and fixated on me, continually berating me, telling me to take off my gear and give it to him, to show solidarity with we the people, or we're gonna run over you. His voice cracked with the strain and the volume of his threats. He continued, "Do you think your little pea shooter guns are gonna stop this crowd? No, we're going in that building." Eventually there was a surge in the crowd, the fence buckled and broke apart, and we were unable to hold the line. A chaotic melee ensued. Terrorists pushed through the line and engaged us in hand-to-hand combat. Several attempted to knock me over and steal my baton. One latched onto my face and got his thumb in my right eye.
The thing that frustrates me the most about these proceedings is that I know with absolute certainty that of the hundreds of thousands of Trump supporters who have and will watch it, almost all of them will take from all of this the conclusion that these men are pussies. Like, we have 3 of the hardest dudes given their testimonies so far. Like, just significantly harder than me, or than people in chat, the people watching, whatever. They've all teared up talking about this. And all the Trump supporters are going to look at this and go, "Yeah, they're faking it. You know, wow, so sensitive." You know, I guarantee 100%.
Attempting to gouge it out. I cried out in pain and managed to shake him off. Before any permanent damage was done. I couldn't fully engage anyone. For the moment I do is when another 20 terrorists move in to attack while my hands are full. It was all we could do to keep ourselves on our feet and continue to fall back. I'm sprayed with a fire extinguisher, and a red smoke grenade burns at our feet. In the fight, a terrorist is knocked to the ground and his jacket rides up, exposing a large hunting knife on his belt. I, along with several other officers, piled on him, while another removed the knife from his person. He regained himself unharmed and shouts indignantly, "What are you doing? What are you guys doing?" At this point, the terrorists had claimed most of the western terrace, cornering myself and other officers on the southern edge. We found a side stair off of the terrace up to an upper landing, followed by more stairs up and inside. Inside the Capitol building, officers walked through the halls briefly until they found a place to sit, decontaminate their faces
pretty bad
of OC and
yesterday.
CS, and take a quick breather.
Painting the studio I was
managed to
working
find
on.
a package of water bottles and was passing them out. I washed off my face as best I could, rinsed out my mouth, and drank the rest. I took the opportunity of relative safety to don my gas mask. Not long afterward, I heard someone calling for officers to move to assist. I steeled myself for another round and descended a stairway into a long hallway filled with smoke and screams. The Capitol building is labyrinthine, but judging from the sound of intense combat, I could tell this hallway led outside to where the terrorists had forced our retreat. Officers were stacked deep, but every
I'm
so
glad
often
that they're
one would
actually
fall back from the front
referring
line,
them
nursing an
as
injury, or
traitors,
struggling to breathe,
or not
and those who
traitors,
remained
terrorists.
would take a step forward.
That was the
It was a
biggest
battle of
issue with like
inches,
a lot of
with one side
Republicans are
pushing
like
the other a few, and
won't
then
say
the other
what
side
it
regaining
is.
their ground. At the time, I suspect many others in the hallway did not know that the terrorists had gained entry into the building by breaking in doors and windows elsewhere, so we believed ours to be the last line of defense before the terrorists had true access to the building, and potentially our
There
elected
we go.
representatives. Eventually, it was my turn in the meat grinder that was the front line. The terrorists had a wall of shields that they had stolen from officers, as well as stolen batons, what other armaments they brought. Even during this intense contest of wills, they tried to convert us to their cult. One man shouted, "We all just want to make our voices heard, and I think you feel the same.
Damn
I
it.
really think you feel the same." All while another man attempts to batter us with a stolen shield. Another man, like many others, didn't seem to appreciate that this wasn't a game. He fought his way across the lawn, up the steps, through the western terrace, all the OC and CS gas, and at the front line of this final threshold was asking us to hold on because he has asthma. The two sides were at a stalemate at a metal door frame that sat in the middle of the hallway. At the front line, I inserted myself so the frame was at my back in an effort to give myself something to brace against, provide additional strength when pushing forward. Unfortunately, soon after I secured this position, the momentum shifted, and we lost the ground that got me there.
Damn it.
On my left was a man with a clear riot shield stolen during the assault. He slammed it against me, and with all the weight of the bodies pushing behind him, trapped me. My arms were pinned and effectively useless, trapped against either the shield on my left or the door frame on my right. With my posture preventing me no function
I don't know what
strength or
the
freedom of movement.
I don't know what
I
the
was
goal of
effectively
that was,
defenseless and
but
gradually sustaining injury from the increasing pressure of the mob. Directly in front of me, a man seized the opportunity of my vulnerability. He grabbed the front of my gas mask and used it to beat my head against the door. He switched to pulling it off my head, the straps stretching against my skull and straining my neck. He never uttered any words I recognized, but opted instead for guttural screams. I remember him foaming at the mouth.
Come
He
on.
also put his cell phone in his mouth so that he had both hands free to assault me. Eventually, he succeeded in stripping away my gas mask, and a new rush of exposure to CS and OC spray hit me.
Literal
Mob of
animals.
terrorists were coordinating their efforts now, shouting "Heave! Ho!" as they synchronized, pushing their weight forward, crushing me further against the metal door frame. The man in front of me grabbed my baton that I
You're
still
kicking
held in
my
my
ass
hands,
right now.
and in my current state, I was unable to retain my weapon. He
Good
bashed
for
me in
them,
the
though.
head and face with it, rupturing my lip and adding additional injury to my skull. At this point, I knew I couldn't sustain much more damage and remain upright. At best, I would collapse and be a liability to my colleagues. At worst, be dragged out into the crowd and lynched. Unable to move or otherwise signal the officers behind me that I needed to fall back, I did the only thing that I could do and screamed for help. Thankfully, my voice was heard over the cacophony of yells and the blaring alarm. The officer closest to me was able to extricate me
I
from
knew
my
he was
position,
somewhere.
and another helped me fall back to the building again. I had found some more water and decontaminated my face as best I could. I don't know how long I waited in the halls for, but soon after I got back on my feet and went to the where the fight was again. Until reinforcements arrived, every able
close
body
one.
made a difference. Without my gas mask, I was afraid I'd be a liability in the hallway, so I took the exit outside of the upper landing above the West Terrace. I found a police line being held, and the terrace encircling us, much like on the West Terrace lower.
I know peer review. Don't worry.
It was getting later in the day, however, and it appeared we weren't the only ones getting tired. It seemed most of the mob was content to yell rather than try and break our line again. After some time of guarding the upper landing, I saw reinforcements arrive from the south. I'm not sure which law enforcement agency it was, but I turned to them and I started clapping. As it was a sign that badly needed help was starting to finally arrive. Soon after that, I started feeling the effects of the day taking their toll and went back inside to rest.
Oh.
Gradually,
I
all
thought
the
someone
members of
got you.
CDU-42 gathered in the room known as the
Sorry,
Capitol
friendo.
Crypt. We checked on each other and convalesced, glad to see each other in one piece. Despite our exhaustion, we would have ran out into the fight again should the need have arisen. Thankfully, as the day wore on, more and more resources had arrived at the Capitol to drive off the terrorists.
I think I'm starting to change my mind in the whole tear gas thing from one of the people who stun locked me for 30 minutes. Oh, there we go, I guess.
We stayed
I
in
just
the
want to get
until
one.
quite late. And even after we were allowed to leave the grounds, we didn't get to go home. Those who needed immediate medical attention took a van to the local hospital.
Leon, you
while
bottom.
the
Get
rest
over
was
here.
parked near the city center until the city was deemed secure enough for us to check off. I believe we finally got that message around 1 a.m. the following morning. We drove back to the 4th District and from there went home. Thank you for letting me testify.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I now recognize Officer Dunn to summarize his testimony.
Chairman Thompson,
There we go.
members of the select committee.
I believe this man uses the N-word with the hard R, which, I guess he can get away with it, but not me. All right. But I don't know how to... that was a joke. Stop. Twitch probably won't like that. Does anyone have the specific timestamps on the C-SPAN? So that I can know which portion to skip. It's from 148 to 150. Is that true? Because that feels like it's different from what other people have given.
Hello.
148 to 150. He is talking there, but that's the next segment. Hassan is always playing the hard N-word on Twitch. You know what? This is literally on C-SPAN. I'm just going to keep going. I don't care. Twitch.
Thank you for the opportunity today to give my account regarding the events of January 6, 2021. From my firsthand experience as a Capitol Police officer directly involved in those events and still hurting from what happened that day. I'm providing this testimony solely in my personal capacity, and not as a representative of the United States Capitol Police. Before I begin,
Hey.
I'd like to take a moment of my time to ask for a moment of silence for my fallen colleague, Officer Brian Sicknick, who died from injuries he
I'm
sustained
probably gonna get food here
in the
shortly.
line of duty defending the capital of our beloved democracy. Thank you. I reported for duty at the Capitol as usual, early on the morning of January 6th. We understood that the vote to certify President Biden's election would be taking place that day, and protests might occur outside the Capitol. But we expected any demonstrations to be peaceful expressions of First Amendment freedoms, just like the scores of demonstrations we had observed for many years. After roll call,
I don't even remember
I took
how
my
to get out
Overwatch
of this
post
thing.
on the east front of the Capitol, standing on the steps that led up to the Senate chamber. As the morning progressed, I did not see or hear anything that gave me cause for alarm. But around 10:56 a.m., I received a text message from a friend forwarding a screenshot of what appeared to be the potential plan of action, very different from a peaceful demonstration. The screenshot bore the caption, January 6th, Rally Point, Lincoln Park, and said,
I'm sorry. Can you just imagine? I'm saying this like it hasn't happened when it definitely does, but the fact that like 4chan green text posts were being disseminated as part of like info gathering on like the insurrectionist plan, you know, like we've got a plan of what they're gonna do here, and it's like a green text post and an Instagram meme, you know, from an anti-vaxxer page or something.
the objective was the Capitol. It said, amongst other things, that Trump has given us marching orders and to keep your guns hidden. It urged people to bring your trauma kits and gas masks, to link up early in the day in 6 to 12-man teams. It indicated there would be time to arm up. Seeing that message caused me concern. To be sure, looking back now, it seemed to foreshadow what happened later. At the time, though, we had not received any threat warnings from our chain of command. I had no independent reason to believe that violence was headed our way. As the morning progressed and the crowd of protesters began to swell on the east side of the Capitol, many displaying Trump flags, the crowd was chanting slogans like, "Stop the steal," and "We want Trump." But the demonstration was still being conducted in a peaceful manner. Early that afternoon, Capitol Police Dispatch advised all units over the radio that we had an active 10100 at the Republican National Committee nearby. 10100 is police code for a suspicious package, such as a potential bomb. That radio dispatch got my attention, and I started to get more nervous and worried, especially because the crowds on the east front of the Capitol were continuing to grow. Around the same time, I started receiving reports on the radio about large crowd movements around the Capitol, coming from the direction of the ellipse to both the west and east fronts of the Capitol. Then I heard urgent radio calls for additional officers to respond to the west side, and an exclamation, a desperate voice, that demonstrators on the west side had breached the fence. Now it was obvious that there was a direct threat to the Capitol. I quickly put on a steel chest plate, which weighs approximately 20 pounds, and carrying my M4 rifle, sprinted around the north side of the Capitol to the west terrace and the railing of the inaugural stage, where I had a broad view of what was going on. I was stunned by what I saw. In what seemed like a sea of people, Capitol police officers and Metropolitan police officers, MPD, were engaged in desperate hand-to-hand fighting with rioters across the West Lawn. Until then, I had never seen anyone physically assault Capitol Police or MPD, let alone witness mass assaults being perpetrated on law enforcement officers. I witnessed the rioters using all kinds of weapons against officers, including flagpoles, metal bike racks that they had torn apart, and various kinds of projectiles. Officers were being bloodied in the fighting. Many were screaming, and many were blinded and coughing from chemical irritants being sprayed in their faces. I gave decontamination aid to as many officers as I could, flushing their eyes with water to dilute the chemical irritants. Soon thereafter, I heard Attention all units. The Capitol has been breached, and that rioters were in various places inside the building. At that point, I rushed into the Capitol with another officer, going first to the basement on the Senate side, where I'd heard an MPD officer needed a defibrillator. After returning outside to the West Terrace to assist officers, I went back into the Capitol and up the stairs towards the crypt. There I saw rioters who had invaded the Capitol carrying a Confederate flag, a red MAGA flag, and a Don't Tread on Me flag. I decided to stand my ground there to prevent any rioters from heading down the stairs to the Lower West Terrace entrance, because that's where officers were getting decontamination aid and were particularly vulnerable. I confronted a group of insurrectionists, warning them to not go down those steps. One of them shouted, "Keep moving, patriots." Another displayed what looked like a law enforcement badge and told me, "We're doing this for you." One of the invaders approached me like he was going to try to get past me and head down the stairs. I hit him, knocking him down. After getting relieved by other officers in the crypt, I took off.
I'm sorry, man. It's a little funny. The other cops during their testimony described how when they first clashed with the insurrectionists, it was like this big tussle. This guy, who appears to be 8 feet tall, I hit him and he fell down. That guy's dead now. The guy he punched, he's one of the people who died. It just fucking flew back. He's huge. Look at his shoulders. What the fuck? And he said the first group of people who came up to him like, "We're doing this for you," and then they like moved past him like because they didn't want to fight him. Like, Jesus. Okay, I'm sorry.
Running upstairs towards the speaker's lobby and helped a plainclothes officer who was getting hassled by insurrectionists. Some of them were dressed like members of a militia group, wearing tactical vests, cargo pants, and body armor. I was physically exhausted, and it was hard to breathe and to see because of all the chemical spray in the air. More and more insurrectionists were pouring into the area by the speaker's lobby near the rotunda, and some wearing
Hey, thanks
MAGA
for the
hats
like.
and shirts that said Trump 2020. I told them to just leave the Capitol, and in response they yelled, "No man, this is our house. President Trump invited us here. We're here to stop the steal. Joe Biden is not the president. Nobody voted for Joe Biden." I'm a law
Zero
enforcement officer,
people.
and I do my best to keep politics out of my job. But in this circumstance, I responded, "Well, I voted for Joe Biden. Does my vote not count? Am I nobody?" That prompted a torrent of racial epithets. One woman in a pink MAGA shirt yelled, "You hear that, guys? This nigger voted for Joe Biden." Then the crowd, perhaps around 20
That's
people,
so fucked up.
joined in screaming, "Boo, fucking nigger." No one had ever called me a nigger while wearing the uniform
I'm
of a Capitol
gonna
police officer.
skip this part real
In the
quick.
days following the attempted insurrection, other black officers was there offering support to officers. And when he and I saw each other, he came over and he gave me a big hug. I sat down on a bench in the rotunda with a friend of mine, who was also a black Capitol police officer, and told him about the racial slurs I endured. I became very emotional and began yelling, "How the blank could something like this happen? Is this America?"
Ah, damn it.
Thank you for
I began
censoring.
sobbing. Officers came over to console me. Later on January 6th, after order and security had been restored in the
All right,
Capitol
let's try this again.
through the hard work and sacrifices,
I definitely
Law
shouldn't be here
enforcement.
yet, but
members took the floor of the House to speak out about what had happened that day. Among them was House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, who, along with my fellow officers, I had protected that day and will protect today and tomorrow. I had protected that day and will protect today and tomorrow. And the Minority Leader, to his great credit, said the following to the House: "The violence, destruction, and chaos we saw earlier was unacceptable, undemocratic, and un-American. It was the saddest day I've ever had serving in this institution." End quote. Members of the select committee, the Minority Leader was absolutely right.
I made the mistake of reading Twitter responses to this guy's testimony, nothing of racial dog whistles and references to Jesse Smollett. Conservatives are literal NPCs. Like I said, they're literally, again, I've said this 1,000 times during this stream, and I'll keep saying it. I politically matured when I realized that sometimes things aren't shades of gray, that's just black and white. And sometimes people are just bad. There's just an evil side, you know. I think sometimes people get so caught up with the obsession with nuance, but sometimes nuance leads you to the correct position that, yeah, sometimes there is just a holistically bad side. And that's the side we're up against, unfortunately. A lot of the people like that don't know why they are the way they are, and they don't understand why why the things they say are bad. It's not like they can't be pulled over, but it doesn't change the fact that the political movement they represent is just holistically bad. I have yet to meet a conservative that isn't pure fucking evil or dumber than fuck. Yeah, that's pretty much been my experience too. Maybe not holistically dumb as fuck or holistically evil, but in the instances where they're talking about their politics, yeah, pretty much.
Oh,
or
come
just
on,
lazy.
come on, let's
Sometimes
not die here.
It's just a contemptuous disinterest in the well-being of others, which I guess you could call evil. There are plenty of smart conservatives who aren't actively malicious, but all of the intelligence in the world just pours from their brain the moment they have to think politics, you know? It just vacates them in an instant.
How he described what took place in the Capitol. And for those of us in the Capitol Police who serve and revere this institution and who love the Capitol building, it was the saddest day for us as well. More than 6 months later, January 6th still isn't over for me. I've had to avail myself of multiple counseling sessions from the Capitol Police Employee Assistance Program, and I'm now receiving private counseling therapy for the persistent emotional trauma of that day. I've also participated in many peer support.
Oh yeah, I saw Matt Walsh's tweet where he was like, men shouldn't cry in public. Remember what I said, like, Republicans are calling these guys pussies?
I've talked.
Here. Rep Adam Kissinger pretends to cry during January 6th hearing. Men shouldn't cry in public,
No!
blah, blah. The funny thing is that, like, Matt Walsh looks like a dude who would break
Alright,
into a
I'm gonna
sob
go
if
elsewhere.
you stole his, like, sippy cup, you know? He seems like the kind of guy who carries one of those mini milk cartons
some
around,
levels
and if you
to
slapped it
get.
out of his hand, he would, like, fall to his knees.
I'm like level
So
2.
it is a little bit funny seeing this, like, extraordinary machismo from a person who looks like
I don't even know where I'm at.
somebody did a realistic 3D render of a cartoon character drawn to look like a man-child, you know? You know what I mean? You know those realistic 3D renders of cartoon characters? Like, here's realistic Peter Griffin. He looks like somebody drew a really annoying guy in, like, Bob's Burgers. And then somebody was like, I can make a real person out of this. And they brought about Matt Walsh, you know?
Support programs with fellow law enforcement officers from around the United States. I know so many other officers continue to hurt, both physically and emotionally. I want to take this moment to speak to my fellow officers about the emotions they're continuing to experience from the events of January 6th. There's absolutely nothing wrong with seeking professional counseling. What we went through that day was traumatic, and if you are hurting, please take advantage of the counseling services that are available to us. I also respectfully ask that this select committee review the available resources, the services available to us, and consider whether they are sufficient enough to meet our needs, especially with respect to the amount of leave that we are allowed. In closing, we can never again allow democracy to be put in peril, as it was on January 6th.
Gosh, is there ever going to be an end of fascism, or is it just a vicious cycle? I'm not a utopian. It feels like pretty much all of human history is us struggling against, like, the incomprehensible weight of natural inequality, you know? Not having enough food, shelter, the weather being terrible, people dying horribly. And it just seems like fascism is, like, the political equivalent of a drought. Where you can do a lot to prevent a drought. You can set up good policies and institutions. You can build things to forestall or prevent a drought. You can have responsible ecological conservational programs. But if those systems fail, or sometimes if you're just really unlucky, the drought can happen anyway. And you have to deal with it. Unfortunately, I don't think we can get past that. We can make it less likely. We can move further from it.
Thank the members of the Select Committee for your commitment to determine what led to disaster at the Capitol on January 6th, what actually took place that day, and what steps should be taken to prevent such an attack on our democracy from ever happening again. I also want to thank and acknowledge my brothers and sisters in blue who fought alongside me on January 6th to protect our democracy. Each of you is a hero, and it is my honor to serve with you each and every day. I'd like to thank the American people for all of the support that they have provided these past several months to me and my fellow officers. Lastly, to the rioters, insurrectionists, and the terrorists of that day, democracy went on that night and still continues to exist today. Democracy is bigger than any one person.
Yeah, really quick. Let's get involved on Twitter. Okay? Here's the video clip that we're basically looking at right now, and it's like 6,000 comments of people responding saying either this never happened or you deserved it, N-word. So, I feel like we should get involved. How do we phrase this? Wow. There, how about that? That fits, right? Yeah, I'm a very slow typer. How you tweet so good? Okay, that's fine. Punctuation. I don't add periods at the end. Go.
Come on.
Go. Go. Every tweet is a banger when I'm streaming, okay? AstroTurf? Yeah, AstroTurf. It's a confusing sentence.
There we go.
I don't think it's that confusing. Have you seen Tucker Carlson shitting on the other guy? Yeah, like I said, that's the Republican line here. Oh my god, these huge, chiseled police officers are betas for being upset.
Nervous. Watch Fanone cite the psychological trauma he endured as an excuse for ditching our Bill of Rights.
What?
I've been left with the psychological trauma and the emotional anxiety of having survived
what Bill of
such
Rights?
a horrific event.
Now, not to in any way underplay the crimes that were committed on January 6th, and there were crimes committed on January 6th, but compared to what? What's interesting is that Michael Fanone didn't mention experience any trauma during the time he spent last year. People he doesn't...
During the time he spent at BLM protests? Huh, I wonder if there was any difference between BLM protests and the January 6th Capitol riots. I assume that's what he was going to say, because the footage that he was playing was almost certainly from a BLM protest.
Yeah, fucking...
At this point, Tucker should actually be canceled, right? I mean, like, morally, he should have decades ago. Legally, no more now than before. But yeah, Tim Pool's the same. These people are all fucking sociopaths, okay? They don't care about anything beyond their own personal self-interest. Tim Pool titles trigger the fuck out of me. Democrats lie and GOP rep cries at Capitol hearing Antifa BLM rights down by Democrats. It's like so busy, you know? Yeah, it's just all team sports here. I bet you that Tim's not going to go over any of the footage. He's just going to go over,
including the N-word. The officer said he was also called, I can't repeat these words, derogatory things by Antifa.
Tim Pool's a
and I remember when the story came
chump.
out, and I was surprised to hear footage of derogatory things by Antifa. There's video of it, actually. There is video footage of it. And I remember when the story came out, and I was surprised to hear. You're watching this police officer standing guard in front of an ICE building. I think it's ICE. And they're screaming racial slurs at him. I witnessed this. Not that one specifically. But I was in Portland, and there was a Proud Boys rally protest. And there, an Antifa.
What does this have to do?
Oh, don't kill me! Don't kill me! Ah!
They filled them with water and put rats in it. The rats could not.
It has nothing to do with anything. He's just going over BLM because he wants to deflect from the.
This black police officer. No one had ever called me that word while wearing the uniform of USCP. I'm sorry, that just sounds like that happened. Like,
again, like This is what I mean. Dude, you can literally look in the comments below and see racial, like, hardcore racism shit. Who would have thought the January 6th insurrectionists could be racist, dude? That's crazy. But he knows this. He believes this. He doesn't believe any of this shit. We're very, very off the Tim Pool is authentic in the things that he believes train.
You were fighting with people, and then in the midst of the chaos that you have claimed was an insurrection and violence and chemicals being spread everywhere, someone stopped to yell out that you were using a racial epithet. And
wait, I'm sorry. Do people at protests and riots not shout things at their opposition? What? Yes? All the time? That's like the main thing you do there.
Wow.
They all started yelling it? I mean, I'm sorry, man.
He didn't say they all yeah, like a crowd of them? Yeah, a crowd of them said the N-word? Yeah, I'd believe it.
I've been to a lot of right-wing events, and that just seems to me to be over the top.
Well, better take Tim Pool's word for it, dude. He's been to some right-wing events, and he doesn't think they'd be super racist, you know.
Yeah, it's fucking stupid.
But maybe. You know, if that really happened, I got no problem saying that's horrible.
Thank you, Tim. All right. Really straddling that line. We're getting distracted here, and we have a finite amount of stream left.
Any one party. You all tried to disrupt democracy that day, and you all failed. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. I thank all the witnesses for their testimony. The rules we established allowed you the opportunity to tell your story. There's no question about it. You've done it in your own words. We appreciate it. And so what we will do now is begin our questioning of you. I now recognize myself for questions. At the time of the attack on the Capitol, I was in the gallery observing the proceedings on the House floor. While members of Congress were being protected by the police, you, the patriots protecting the Capitol and our very democracy, were being attacked by the mob outside. I want to learn more about what you did and what you witnessed. That officer known as a narcotics officer, you weren't supposed to be at the Capitol on January 6th, is that right?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
What prompted you to come to the Capitol?
It's my last day before retirement. Heard they needed me on the job one last time.
I mean, I was listening to the radio transmissions, specifically those coming from now Commander Robert Glover, who was the on-scene commander. If you've listened to those transmissions, he identifies himself as Cruiser 50. I heard things that I'd never heard before in my law enforcement career. In addition to the numerous distress calls or 1033s that I heard, which are, while not commonplace,
Let's do myself a
also
huge
not
favor.
uncommon in policing. I heard things like, you know, the declaration of a citywide 1033, which in my career, to my recollection, has only been utilized in addition to the 9/11 attacks on the Navy Yard attack. And so I found that particularly distressful. Also, you could hear the tone of the individual officers' voices. They were scared. They were, you know, clearly outnumbered and being violently assaulted.
Thank you. So basically, radio traffic at 1033.
No, fuck you.
On the radio.
Let me go.
And your basic law enforcement instinct said your fellow comrades needed help, and therefore you made your way along with your friend to the Capitol.
Yes, sir.
So you went anyway, and let me thank you for that. And I understand a number of other people did the same. Officer Hodges, we've seen the harrowing video of you being crushed in a doorway as you bravely fought to keep the mob from breaching the Capitol. Many of your fellow officers' acts of heroism were not captured on video and are not therefore known to the public. Can you please share with the committee other acts of heroism by your colleagues on January 6th that you're aware of?
Absolutely.
That's pretty good, man. Do you? What a great prompt. Being asked at a congressional hearing, you know? Can you tell me about all the badass shit you and your buddies did? Why, yes, sir. Yes, I can. Hold that thought, though. Let's catch up on donos so we don't have to end early to give me time to catch up on donos. Okay? Real quick. Snaxian1 and Kesari Roskakori, thank you for the tier 1 subs both. Thank you, Kesari. I really appreciate that. Casey Marlowe with the $4 and $5 respectively. Thank you very, very much.
I didn't mean to take skooma.
Amanda Wilding, thank you for the very kind $20. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Space Raptor with the $10. So noted. Thank you. James Keane with the $10 yourself. Yeah, we'll probably cover Jimmy Dore going on the Joe Rogan podcast tomorrow. Capricious Bit, 85 Derek, and Title Point Roller Girl, thank you all very much for the incredibly kind $5. I really appreciate that. Likewise, Iridian Knight, thank you. I haven't seen it. Crafty Kitty Cat, thank you for the sub, my friend. I really appreciate that. And Brandon C with a very kind $20. I think the most humane crowd control method, which would have worked on even the January 6 rioters, would have been Alden's gas. P.S. Love your content. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Still Alive and Cycle, thank you for the $5 both. I really appreciate that. Just remember, a lot of alt-writers are rural folk living on farms. They may be used to terrible smells. Lol. Ah, no need to be classist. I think that the alt-right is actually overrepresented in, like, the white evangelical upper middle class type deal, you know? Because, like, it's usually, like, isolation, alienation, and social dysfunction that drives you towards being, like, alt-right. Like, normal, well-adjusted people in America, or at the very least people who have, like, work to do, usually don't fall into that. It's usually people who are... Okay, we have former alt-writers in chat. You agree with me on this. Basically just fucking losers. And that kind of drives them into whatever god-awful rabbit hole they fall into. Yeah. But as we all know, farmers are salt of the earth, so... Still alive. Oh, gotcha. Still alive and Cycle just did that. Iridian Knight, thank you for the $5. Michael Cuomo, thank you for the $2. Beef Stew with the $5. Thank you very much. Wanted to know the time and date of the Kirk debate. I think it goes live at like 5 p.m. PT, so 8 p.m. ET, I think, on the 3rd of August. And a friendly reminder to everyone watching that I will not be epically owning anyone there. It's going to be a 3v1 between Tim Pool, Charlie Kirk,
go to the bathroom. I'll be
and
back.
the producer, the Nazi lady, or not Nazi, a fascist lady, I don't know.
There we go. I think I'm actually gonna run and get some breakfast. So I'm gonna end stream.